Today we are at Tokara Wine Estate in Stellenbosch, and we are shooting my first Chim's wine tasting event talk show, and we are interviewing one of, if not the best winemaker in South Africa, Mr. Stewart Botha, the winemaker right here at Tokara Wine Estate in Stellenbosch. Stay tuned in if you want to find out more about Tokara Wine Estate, about Mr. Stewart Botha himself. Stay tuned in because we're just about to go in and find the man himself. Good day, everyone. My name is Chim, and the owner of Chim's wine tasting event. Born in Democratic Republic of Congo, but grew up here in South Africa. And today I'm shooting my first Chim's wine tasting event talk show. And I am super honored to interview one of, if not the best winemaker in South Africa. And is the one and the only Mr. Stewart Botha, the winemaker at Tokara Wine Estate. How are you, sir?
I'm incredibly well, thanks, Chim. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. And thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to interview you today. And I know you are a very busy man. I'm such an honored. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Mr. Stewart, myself, I know you quite well. But for our listener out there, could you please just tell them about yourself?
Right, well, I'm the winemaker at Tokara Wines, as you know. I've been here for 8 years. Wow. But that doesn't mean my career has only been 8 years. I've been in the wine industry for 21 years. And my journey with wine didn't actually begin in a vineyard growing up. My parents weren't winemakers. They weren't vineyard managers or growers. So I came from a background that wasn't necessarily wine-oriented. So I made my own journey into wine, and it really started. I remember the day that it happened. I visited a property similar to Tokara.
Yeah.
It was the school holidays. I was still relatively young, and we went to Vergelegen Estate in Somerset West,
Very good place.
just to taste the wines, to look and have lunch. And it was that day that the penny dropped for me that actually there's this industry that exists in the Western Cape of South Africa. Surrounded by beauty, you are always in a beautiful natural environment, and that there was a potential to be privileged enough to work in such an environment. And from that day onwards, I directed all of my efforts at school, at university, towards becoming a winemaker one day.
Wow. So that is very beautiful, interesting story. So young man with a dream to be one of the best winemaker in South Africa, and soon to be in the world. That is a dream. That is a dream we all upcoming younger generation in the industry dreaming of, including myself.
Yes.
So, Mr. Stewart, with the beauty and everything you started, why Tokara?
So Tokara is, without a doubt, it is and it has always been one of the foremost wine estates in South Africa. The predecessor to me in the winemaking was an incredibly talented man, and he put Tokara on the map. And as you know, the Ferreira family who own it are a South African family.
Which we're going to get to it now.
Yeah. They've got a big commitment to not only supplying a beautiful vineyard and call it the capital backing to put South African wines on the map internationally and locally, of course, but a real commitment to make a stand and make a real strong impression of South African wines on the global scale. And that takes a lot of backing. It takes a lot of dedication, if you will, and many, many years to actually to get right.
Absolutely.
So Tokara has been around for 25 years. It is an exceptional property. It is one of the foremost, like I said. And when the position became available for winemaker Tokara, even when I was at university, I always dreamt of potentially being the winemaker here. So it was not going to be a position that I passed up, and I applied. I put my hat in the ring, and the rest is history, as they say.
Absolutely. How was it coming to Tokara Wine Estate? How was the welcoming? How was, before we get to the owner of Tokara and the history of Tokara? I mean, myself, I've worked in a couple of places. I know when a new person walks in, some people will be like, oh, such a good person, down to earth, which you are.
Yeah.
But how was it you're welcoming to Tokara? How did the team which you find there and your predecessor, how did they welcome you?
Very well. I mean, Tokara is not a small organization. It's a medium-sized winery.
Absolutely.
So the team is relatively big. About 75 people have work at Tokara in various aspects across the board.
Correct.
So the team is relatively large.
Absolutely.
But the winery team, having said that, is about, 25% of that. And they were incredibly welcoming. The way in which it was handled and managed was very professional, of course. I had a 9-month handover with my predecessor.
Wow.
So their commitment to making sure that all of the capital that he had in his mind was conveyed so that there was never a glitch or a hiccup along the way with that transition. It was very, very cleverly managed. The team is excellent. They're very well supported. And as a result, it's easy to fit into that environment.
Definitely.
You're not coming in trying to fix things.
Correct.
You're coming in trying to continue with the momentum that's already there.
I can testify to that myself. As you know, myself, I work here. This is such a nice place to work. I can definitely testify to that. So could you please take us to the history of the Tokara? When the owner, before I even get to the owner, who's the owner? Myself, I know, but for our listeners, who's the owners? And when was Tokara bought? And when they bought the Tokara, the idea. Okay, let's start. When was...
I can cover that.
Yeah.
So the story is a fantastic story, but the Ferreira family own Tokara. They're a South African family. And the patriarch of that family, G.T. Ferreira, is very well known in the circles of South Africa, particularly in the banking world, where he had an incredibly successful career with RMB and FMB, names that we're all familiar with. And later in his career, that was obviously based in Johannesburg in the northern part of the country. Later in his career, he decided that he wanted to move to the Cape for the lifestyle that the Cape provides, something different from Johannesburg. And it was around 1994 that they made that decision.
Wow.
And you'll remember 1994 is really the advent of South Africa's democracy.
Correct.
And like I said, having had a successful career in banking, he was able to purchase something remarkable, and it gave him excitement and ambition to create something completely different to what he had done up to that point. And so he bought a property on the side of the Simonsberg Mountain, initially starting quite small, with the idea that they would create a small wine farm and produce some spectacular wines. Here we are 25 vintages later.
Wow.
Many, many more years later.
Wow.
And Tokara has grown significantly in the size of the property. We have a rather well-sized winery and production. And the family ambition to generate and create wines that will represent South Africa and stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the best wines in the world is now being realized. So it's an incredibly exciting time to be at Tokara. It's been exciting all along. You can imagine when the winery was first built, how much energy and ambition was there. And it hasn't dissipated.
Yeah.
It hasn't lost momentum.
Correct.
If anything, it's grown.
Yeah.
So we're on a very, very good track at the moment. We're starting to now become very well recognized globally, in South Africa, of course. And the potential of the property is just every year that passes becoming more and more realized.
Absolutely. That is very touching story and very, very beautiful story. Now, when Tokara was bought, we all know it was 1994. Before we get to when was the first crepe produced in the farm and what was that crepe, I would love to ask, when Tokara was bought, was the wine produced here? And what was the name? And how did the name Tokara came up?
So, Takara, as it is today, is an amalgam of 4 different farms that all neighbored each other at one point. So, in the beginning, GT and Annemarie bought one farm, which was central to everything. The farm's name was called Rust and Vrede.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
yeah.
you heard that name before.
I heard that name before.
There is another wine estate by that name, but the actual property name was Rust and Vrede.
Okay.
And it's been named that since the late 1700s, so
Wow.
very long time.
Yeah.
The farms around it were accumulated as Takara and their realization that they were sat in some of the best terroir in the country grew. And GT has a fantastic saying. He says, you only get one opportunity in your life to buy your neighbor's farm.
Very smart
So you have to take it.
Absolutely.
So as those properties became available, he bought them. And they will never become available again. You know,
Correct.
they are now part of a big thing, which is Takara.
Wow.
So that's where it began in 1994. I've lost track of my thought. What were we talking about?
So we were talking about more about like the name. How did the name Tokara came from? Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So the name Takara and the first wines that were produced here. So you asked me if, when the property was bought, if there were wines being produced here.
Correct.
And the answer to that is absolutely no.
Okay.
So this was ground that lay between 2 very, very famous wine estates that are a lot older than Takara, Rustenburg being the first, and the other one is Thelema. So those were storied family-owned wine estates, and they still are.
Wow.
And here we have a segment in between those 2 estates, which is now Takara. At the time when they purchased the land, it was not being used for growing grapes to make wine. And the first vineyards were actually planted with the idea that they would supply the neighboring farms.
Wow.
Because the neighbors had approached them and said, you know, you're sitting on pure
No,
gold.
Correct.
You know,
Yeah.
you have to do something with that. You can't just leave it.
Just leave it there. Correct.
So that's how the story started.
Wow.
And as with all things like this, the snowball rolls and it gets bigger and bigger. And eventually, sometimes you have great surprises. So the name Takara comes from the 2 children of GT and Annemarie Ferreira.
Okay.
So the son's name is Thomas and the daughter's name is Kara.
Okay.
So they brought those 2 together
Wow.
to create a beautiful name, Takara.
Wow.
It's easily pronounceable no matter what language you speak. It's very memorable and it's a strong brand name.
I have come across a couple of people that always say, Tokara sound like a Japanese. I'm like, no. So
well, they're not too far wrong. There is an island that forms part of the greater Japanese land islands, I suppose, called Takara.
Okay, so that is actually very good. And I would love to ask, when was the first crepe of wine produced at Tokara, and what wine was that?
So when they started out, they didn't want to produce a wine from very young vines because, well, you have to produce wine from the very young vines, but
Correct.
you're never going to call it Takara.
Correct.
So in the beginning, they produced a Cabernet Sauvignon and a Merlot and a Sauvignon Blanc and a Chenin Blanc.
Okay.
So just 4 wines.
Wow.
And they named them Zondernaam. So Zondernaam is Dutch, and it means with no name.
With no name, yeah.
Without name.
Yeah.
So they actually had a label called Zondernaam in the beginning.
Yeah.
And that just shows you how committed they were to making sure that this project of Takara was a success from the first day.
Correct.
So the first time that famous name was ever used, the vines and the wines were 5 years old.
Wow.
So they had produced grapes before and they put them under the Zondernaam name. Only when they were truly satisfied that they had good enough quality for Takara brand
Yeah.
did they make a wine under that brand.
Wow.
And that was the Takara Red.
Takara Red, which, if I'm not...
It was a blend of predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon and then
Correct.
some Merlot and the other border varieties.
Mm.
But later, it became called what we know it today.
As-
It's the Director's Reserve Red.
Absolutely. So that is actually lead me to my next question. But before I get to my next question, because Tokara is known for producing the best wine, like the Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon 2021, just won in a decanter. But before we get to that, we're gonna touch a couple of wine. But I would love us to talk more about like the how is Tokara in terms, is it 350 meters above sea level and altitude, soil? I know it's more decomposed granite,
Yeah.
dominate, but can you please take us through that?
I'll take you on a story of the geology and the history of Takara and where we are in the world. Because when it comes to vineyards, it's very, very important where the grapes are grown. That is the most important thing. The reason for that is that it cannot be copied. It cannot be replicated, and it imparts such an distinctive characteristic to the wines that makes them individual and unique. And that's where the concept terroir comes in.
Okay. Yeah,
so Takara's terroir, we are sat in the foothills of the Simonsberg Mountain, which is a very, very impressive 1,800 meter high mountain that sits quite close to the ocean. The fact that we're in the foothills means we're on slopes, and all the most famous vineyards in the world, there's one thing that they have in common, is that they're on slopes. You very, very seldom find a vineyard on a flat area that is very successful. And the reason for that is grapevines don't like growing in soils that are too rich.
Correct.
And all the nutrients flow to the flat areas and sediment. Grapevines are actually, because they are vines, they like to grow a lot. They're almost like weeds,
Correct.
if we have to be honest. And you need to find a way to curb their enthusiasm, to hold back that growth so that they focus on the bunches, on the fruit. And doing so by planting on slopes, those slopes have been drained very well over hundreds and thousands of years. The soil is medium to low potential,
Wow. Okay.
but that gives you bonsai grapes, very, very small berries, concentrated flavors. And that's the same sort of philosophy that is carried throughout the world when it comes to producing fine wines.
Yeah, correct.
So Takara is situated in those foothills of the famous Simonsberg.
Wow.
The soil is predominantly decomposed granite,
Correct. Yeah.
and then it's overlain by what they call colluvial sandstone
Sandstone.
rocks.
Yeah.
And colluvial basically means that it's actually eroded from the top of the mountain and run down the mountain over hundreds of thousands of years. Just those rocks, they break down and they roll down the side of the mountain, and they form a layer on top of that beautiful, deep, clay-rich decomposed granite.
Absolutely.
And that is our primary attribute that makes Takara wine so powerful.
That actually, when going through my things and also trying to get more information, I come across Tokara, Mr. G.T. Ferreira, also call it Thomas Garrett Ferreira. So I come across, he got two different vineyards.
Yes.
So could you please take us through the size of this Tokara here in Stellenbosch and the one in Algen?
Okay. So this is the home farm. And the farm's extent under vine is 65 hectares,
Okay.
which is not massive. It's big enough, but it's not massive.
Okay.
So I like to say we are big enough to cope, we are small enough to care.
Okay. That sounds very
And
good.
that's a good way to think about it. The rest of the property is more extensive, but most of it is actually the side of the mountain, which has been preserved. The natural biodiversity has been preserved there. So the Ferreira family are essentially custodians of that land. They don't grow anything there. They allow the natural protea and fynbos to grow there. And they just take care that there's no alien vegetation, etc., taking over.
Absolutely.
All right. Then there's another property. I believe in 2003, they were looking to make a style of wine with Sauvignon Blanc that's particularly what people would describe as cool climate.
Correct.
And being in Stellenbosch, we are more suited to warm climate or warmer climate-loving varieties, which give you more rich tropical profiles. You think of our Chardonnay; it's got a lovely, beautiful citrus, powerful aromas, deeper texture.
Yeah.
Cool climate Sauvignon Blanc requires a cooler environment to grow in. And for that reason, they went looking for a vineyard that would have the terroir that is suit specifically that style of wine. And they landed on a beautiful property in Elgin. They did a number of clever things to identify that. They looked at average annual temperatures during the growing season. They looked at the height above sea level, which is always very, very conducive to
very
having
important
cooler
identify,
temperatures. You can always think up in the mountains it's much cooler. They looked at proximity to the ocean. And what they found is the property that we call Highlands now, Takara Highlands. And it's 5.5 kilometers from the sea, which is the cold Atlantic Ocean. It's 400 meters above sea level. So you can imagine how quickly it gets up to that height from the ocean. It's a very, very steep slope.
Yeah.
And then it's very, very cold in the winter. And the soil profile there is decomposed sandstone for the most part, which is very mineral. And it gives you incredible, what a lot of wine people like to refer to as minerality, mineral characters. I prefer to say it's like an oyster shell character. And that, again, beautiful terroir for making that style of wine, and that is why the property was selected. Of course, we have a small vineyard there of Chardonnay, which we make our Cap Classique from. But most of the farm, 18 out of 20 hectares, is planted to Sauvignon Blanc. And it's just to make that beautiful Elgin Reserve collection.
And it's really beautiful. I have to testify to that. We have it right here.
In the glass.
And is, I believe, is one of the top-selling wine at Takara.
Yeah.
And could you please take us through how many they produce? How many bottles do you produce per year?
Okay. So, all in all, Takara produces about 800,000 bottles of wine a year, depending on how big the vintage was for us. So that sounds like an awful lot of wine, but it's not an awful lot of wine if you compare it to what other wineries in the world make. So you would comfortably say that Takara is a medium-sized family-owned wine, and 800,000 bottles is enough bottles to make sure that we can keep all of the families that work at Takara in employment, and we can chart a course further along as history passes, where we can keep the quality levels exactly where we need them to be in order to achieve their ambition of making wines that stand shoulder to shoulder with the best in the world.
Absolutely. And with that, we're going to move now. The exporting market.
Yes.
How many percent do you sell locally and how many percent do you sell internationally? I mean, personally, I know, but for our listeners.
So it's roughly half-half. So it hovers between 48% export and 52% local. So a big component of our wines are sold in the South African market, and that has always been our focus. We're obviously very well known in the South African market, and as a result, that market is there for us. Then we have a number of export markets that make up approximately the other half. And that's when people have come over and been incredibly interested in our wines, met somebody like you, an ambassador for Takara, thought, wow, we have to have these wines back at home.
Absolutely.
And then we've started a business relationship with them in order to achieve that. But that's not one market. That's probably 10 to 12 different countries where we export our wines.
Absolutely. So I think we're going to take through a couple of wine now. So we have like amazing wine in the front of us. So we're going to start a couple of wine, and which I feel like you already covered almost all of them in the previous answers in terms of terroir, altitude, and the soil. But we're going to try to get all of them like one by one to get to understand the climate, the challenge. Because I feel like in the wine industry, we always say, I don't know if that's still existing. Most people say the wine is not made in the cellar, it's made in the vineyard.
Yes.
So I want to, before we start even like to go like from vineyard to everything, For me personally, I know. But let's say for someone out there in China, in the US, is listening to us right now, could you please just tell our listeners, like, when is the harvesting season in South Africa? Yeah. For
So,
both white and red wine,
yeah.
and the late harvest, of course.
So a lot of people don't realize that when it comes to grapevine harvests, you only get one harvest per year. So it's not a continuous crop.
Correct.
So you work for the better part of 11 months just to take one harvest off.
Wow.
All right. Our harvest in South Africa runs between mid-January and, in our case at Takara, April, the beginning of April. So throughout that period, we'll be picking different types of white and red grapes, usually beginning with the white grapes, which ripen first, and ending with your serious, full-bodied, broad-shouldered reds. They like to hang a little bit longer so that you get that richness, slightly fuller, higher alcohol as well. So that's the duration of harvest, but it begins with bubbly, just like in the way you drink wine. You know, it starts with the sparkling wine, then the Sauvignon Blanc or the Chenin Blanc, then the Chardonnay, and so on and so forth until you get into the reds.
To the red. And I believe the white wine, white grape variety harvesting is mostly, and I saw this year, Tokara harvested like late Jan, if I'm not mistaken. And mostly it's like a white grape variety is mostly in Feb, a red grape variety is mostly in March.
Correct.
But with the climate, I saw also is kind of the altitude is changing now. So it was quite interesting also to see that some of the grape variety, like it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Chenin, which was harvested end of Jan GCA at Tokara.
Yes.
Yeah, that is very, very.
It's early. That's early. It's not out of sequence. I think what you might be thinking of is our Elgin Sauvignon Blanc, which came in March.
Yeah.
When we were picking Cabernet Sauvignon and Stellenbosch.
Yeah.
But that's the reason. The reason for that is that it's grown in a much cooler climate.
Cooler climate.
Which
correct.
you remember we sought out for a particular reason.
Yeah.
So because it's a cooler climate, it takes longer to ripen. It starts growing a little bit later than the vines in Stellenbosch. So it tracks behind everything. And then you get this beautiful outcome, which is a cool climate style of Sauvignon Blanc. The only thing is, you're then having to process Sauvignon Blanc at the same time as Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon. Because everything is done here at the home farm.
Yeah. And I feel like that is mostly your hardest time in terms of work because you have to do fermentation, pump over, everything is taking place. Pressing, baskets, everything is taking place. But now we're going to start with one wine farm, like one by one. So we're going to start with the Algen Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah.
Our listener already knows it's coming from cooler climate, which is an Algen. Actually, for those who doesn't know where is Algen, can you please just take us through that, for those who doesn't know?
So Elgin is on what we call the Cape South Coast.
Okay.
So it's an area that has traditionally been known for apple farming and pear farming. And the reason for that is it's very cold in winter, almost icy cold. That's very, very good for apple farming for a specific reason. They need what they call cold units. We chose it because it's a cool area for growing Sauvignon Blanc to give us that style. And it's 85 kilometers from the home farm here in Stellenbosch, southeast of where we are.
Okay.
But towards the ocean as well. So it's literally in the mountains next to the ocean.
So what makes Algen such a great place to grow Sauvignon Blanc? Algen. I think you already actually answered it.
We've sort of covered that.
Yeah, we sort of covered that actually. But since we're coming back to one by one, I just want us to touch base so that people can keep a track of what is happening.
All right. So Elgin Sauvignon Blanc benefits from the attributes of the terroir there. It's 5.5 kilometers from the cold Atlantic Ocean. It's 400 meters above sea level. Another cooling effect.
Correct.
All right. It's got beautiful decomposed sandstone soils underlain by decomposed granite, but that's much deeper down. So you get an incredible minerality and a very, very focused, bright acidity in the wine. It's also, being an aromatic variety, long hang time, so lots of sunlight, but not too hot, means that you get freshness in the acidity, but massive, explosive aromatics at the same time. So the grapes don't cook. They're always cool.
Yeah.
Cool climate. So your aromatics don't burn away. Your acidity remains fresh. And at the end of the day, you get a wine that is super refreshing. Very typical of Sauvignon Blanc. And that's what Sauvignon Blanc is so famous for. It's that refreshing wine that you can drink by itself. You can have it with seafood. You can have it with a light white meat dish like chicken. It's a very, very versatile variety, both to make and to enjoy with food.
Absolutely. Could you please take us through the making process and the cellar?
Okay.
Yeah.
So Takara has always prided itself on employing technology to assist us in achieving our goals with wine. And when it comes to the Elgin Sauvignon Blanc, I think the greatest technological attribute that we employ is a press, which is called an inert press. So we actually have a nitrogen generator on this property, and we exclude any oxygen from the whole process of making the wine, because the flavors and aromas of Sauvignon Blanc are immensely sensitive to air.
Okay.
They get oxidized. So if you think of like an apple, when you cut an apple, if you go and put it on the countertop, you come back in 15 minutes and it's brown. And if you smell it, it doesn't smell as fresh and delicious as
fresh
it did.
at all.
That's
Yeah.
exactly how Sauvignon Blanc reacts in the environment if you just expose it to air. So when we are crushing the grapes and extracting the juice to make the wine, we make sure that it never comes into contact with air. And in that way, we make sure that we captivate all of those beautiful aromas that exist in the grape. And they come into the bottle. They come into the finished product. And that's how we do it. We use a little bit of technology and a little bit of know-how.
Wow. So is it wooded, unwooded?
So the Elgin Reserve Collection Sauvignon Blanc is always fermented in stainless steel.
Okay.
So it's a style of wine which you could consider to be more New World.
Okay.
And
correct.
stainless steel is also, again, it doesn't impart any characteristic like barrels would.
Correct.
Or time on the barrels or in the lees, etc. usually do. Stainless steel allows us to absolutely preserve the aromas and freshness and present them exactly as they come out of the vineyard. And that's why we use it. So the Sauvignon Blanc is always fermented in stainless steel. There is an element that we put to barrel, but it's always seasoned barrel, older wood. That doesn't have much impact in terms of aromatic.
Correct.
But you feel it on the mouth.
Yeah.
You feel it in your palate.
Yeah.
But it's always a small percent, maybe 5%.
Okay.
It's just a little seasoning. You don't taste the wood though.
Yeah. So that is more in what we call it in wine language like a second fill, third fill barrel, that it does not have much flavors.
Yeah.
Okay. So the flavor, I feel like you already covered. And could you please telling the food pairing and aging potential?
So the Elgin has an incredible track record for aging potential. So every year there's the 10-year-old wine report in South Africa.
Wow.
Where you're obliged or you're allowed to submit wines, but they have to be 10 years old. So, this year we will enter the 2015 because it's 2025. The Elgin almost every year, without fail, has won the category for Sauvignon Blanc.
Wow.
With that wine.
Yeah, I can testify
because it
to
has
that. Yeah.
really, really fantastic aging potential. A lot of people don't keep and drink Sauvignon Blanc aged, but it's always a testament to a very, very good wine when it does age well, albeit a white wine. With regards to food pairing, so generally it's a wine that you can drink. Think of beautiful summer days outside on a patio like we sat on right now, next to the poolside. Because it has that beautiful refreshment and that lovely acidity, you can drink it by itself. That's what most people probably enjoy, or how most people probably enjoy it. But then if you think of all the things that you enjoy when it's quite warm outside, oysters, if you want to be particularly impressive, you can have some oysters with the Sauvignon Blanc. It goes well with sushi.
Yeah, that again.
Slightly warmer dishes, you can look at like grilled yellowtail, which is a local game fish, ocean fish, with some salsa verde, something like that, a little salad, chicken breast, chicken salad, Caesar salad. Those sorts of profiles go very, very well with Sauvignon Blanc. And also even a cool gazpacho soup, tomato soup.
Okay.
Really, really fantastic pairing with that wine.
Okay, there you listen to that. I'm sure you're taking a note because this is coming from the person who knows what he's talking about. So I hope you're taking a note. Now, Mr. Stewart, we're going to move to Chardonnay.
Yes.
This is one of my personal favorite wine. And if I feel like I have a class of wine, Chardonnay is one of my favorite.
Okay.
So I feel like I don't want to go like question by question. Could you please take us through the Chardonnay process and where is it grown on the farm? Is it coming from Tokara Wine Estate in Stellenbosch? I understand you said there's another portion of Chardonnay coming from Algen region, which is not a bigger portion. Could you please take us the process of like from the vineyard to the cellar and the barrel process and everything?
Okay. So you quite rightly pointed out that we've got 2 vineyards of Chardonnay. The majority of our plantings are in Stellenbosch at the mother farm, Tokara Stellenbosch. We do have 1 hectare of Chardonnay in Elgin, but we only use that to produce the bubbly. Okay. Again, because it has all those mineral attributes that you want, the lovely fresh acidity, striking acidity that you want in a Caplicin. The rest of the Chardonnay is produced here at the mother farm in Stellenbosch. It's on the mid-slope, again, of the Simonsberg, and it's actually in the middle slope of all the slopes on Tokara, right in the middle.
Wow.
Is where the Chardonnay is. And that's because it enjoys that part of the property. It's not too cold, not too high, not too low, too warm, just in the middle. It's Goldilocks country. Not too warm, not too cold, just right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Chardonnay we make in a style which you could consider to be traditional.
Okay.
That being said, the grapes are crushed, usually with whole clusters, so we don't even destem them. We extract the juice, we settle the juice. The next day we'll take the juice to barrels, which is then part of being the sort of more classic style of winemaking.
Okay.
If you think of the old world, most of the white wine styles that come out of the old world, like Chardonnay, like Bordeaux white blends, Chenin Blanc, all barrel fermented. So stylistically, we emulate that. The juice ferments in barrel and then it matures in barrel for anywhere between 8 and 11 months, depending on the range and the vineyard which it comes from and which range it's intended to go to. So we have the premium range, which is what Tokara would call our beginning range, the white label range. That stays in barrel for about 8 months, but it goes through all the same processes. Then you have the Reserve Collection range, which I think is the one that
I'm asking about.
You're in love with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Reserve Collection range stays in barrel anywhere between 9 and 11 months.
Okay.
But you must remember, winemaking is not like baking a cake. It's not a recipe.
Yeah.
So you have to read the vintage, you have to interpret it. And as you interpret it, you decide how long it can stay, how long it needs to stay. We taste constantly as the wine's maturing in barrel. We stir it constantly because it stays on its lees. And eventually we will make a decision, okay, it's ready. And then the magic comes where we start to select barrels and make even more magic from what we have in front of us.
Wow.
So despite the fact that the Reserve Collection is a single variety Chardonnay, it's actually a blend of many different barrels and 2 or 3 different blocks.
Okay.
But we only choose the best.
Okay. And what barrel do you use?
Thirsty.
Yeah. What barrel do you use?
So we use a number of different barrels. And when you refer to barrels, I'm assuming you're asking about the cooper or the supplier.
Correct.
Because you have probably in excess of 100 different cooperages. Most of them are based in France that produce barrels. On the Chardonnay, we use about 8 different coopers. And we're constantly experimenting with new ones. But then I'll just have 1 or 2 barrels in a season just to see.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
If you're not trying or pushing and experimenting, you're stagnating. So
Absolutely.
we will always have something novel and new just to try, but we have our favorites,
Okay.
but they're a secret.
Yeah.
And you knew that.
I knew that. And I definitely know that. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, you're mostly using a French oak barrel.
That's absolutely right.
Why French oak barrel? Why not American barrel? Why not Hungarian? Why not South African barrels?
Okay, so the American wood has a very, very particular characteristic. You can think of it as quite vanilla-y, a little bit sweeter, and that's why it does so well with a product like bourbon. You know, it's very sweet. It's got that vanilla, heady, aromatic, and it's only for that reason usually employed with big, bold style Shirazes, and even then, not at 100%, like 25, 30 max. Maybe 50% of the wine goes to that American wood. We don't use that because Takara is a very classic wine producer. And we like to make our wines in a classic, noble style. And for that reason, we use only French wood. French wood grows very slowly because their winters are very cold. The grain is very tight, and it's suited to the style of wine that we make. Also, the most experienced coopers in the world, the people who produce barrels, come from France.
Absolutely.
So you want the best of the best for the best wine.
You have to
If
go.
you have any ambition of making the best wine in the world, you need to be giving that wine the best opportunity to be the best wine.
Absolutely. And did this Tokara Reserve Chardonnay went through malolactic fermentation process? And if yes, could you please just take us through what is malolactic fermentation process? I know, but
Yeah.
for our listeners, what is malolactic fermentation process? What does it do to the wine?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the fermentation process that everybody's familiar with is alcoholic fermentation.
Correct.
That's when you take grape juice, fruit juice, any juice, you let it ferment with yeast, you get alcohol, that's the fun part, you get a little bit of carbon dioxide, and heat. Those are the three main byproducts of alcoholic fermentation. When it comes to white wines particularly, and red wines, there's different types of acids that exist in the grape. And one of those acids is called malic acid. And malic acid is the same acid that you get in green apples. That's why in Afrikaans they call it appelsuur,
Okay.
which is directly translated apple acid.
Yeah.
Very literal.
Yeah.
But malic acid is quite green and it's very tart. So what we want to do as winemakers is there's a secondary fermentation that takes place using a very unique bacteria that exists in grape skins or on grapes. And if you allow it to just go naturally, that bacteria will take the malic acid, consume it, because it's interested in it.
Yeah.
It loves malic acid.
Yeah.
And as a byproduct, it produces lactic acid. And lactic acid is the same acid that you get in milk. It's very creamy, it's
correct.
rich, it's smooth, it's silky. So you're taking a very green, astringent, harsh acid, and through that process of malolactic fermentation, you end up with lactic acid in your wine, which is a lovely, smooth, rich, textured acid.
Okay.
So you soften the wine like that. We do allow the Chardonnays to go through malolactic fermentation for that reason.
Yeah.
Because we want that slight buttery, slight velvety, custard characteristic. Another thing that is really, really fantastic is if that fermentation happens in barrel, it also helps to integrate the characteristic of the barrel
the barrels.
with
Correct.
the characteristic of the
Of
wine.
the-
It forms the bridge
Correct.
that brings them together so that they don't stand apart. So generally, it's very, 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 very good for the wine. It's very good for the flavor profile, and it's encouraged.
And would you say certain percentage, let's say 48% went through malolactic fermentation process, or would you say no, the whole Chardonnay went through it?
So that has a lot to do with the sort of philosophy as I approach my winemaking.
Okay.
So each vintage, like I said, we're not working with a recipe.
You are correct, true.
Each vintage has different amounts of malic acid in it.
Correct.
Some vintages are high malic acid vintages, others are low. If the malic acid is high in a vintage, the wine will be sour.
Mm.
If it's low in a vintage, you actually want to keep a little bit of that green acidity to keep the freshness.
Mm.
Conversely, or consequently rather, in vintages with high malic levels, the malic acid, the malic bacteria, malolactic bacteria, wants to go for it. There's lots of food on the table. There's a party to be had. Okay, so we allow it, and it goes through easier in vintages that have higher malic. In vintages that have lower, sometimes it doesn't actually happen naturally, and we never force it. And what you find is that the vintage actually has a way of dictating the balance in the wine for you.
Yeah.
And as I approach the winemaking, I don't want as a winemaker to be too overbearing or too forceful with the guiding the wine into the bottle, because I want to bring as many of the natural attributes and characteristics from the beginning in the vineyard all the way to the bottle, so that again we have something that's very unique, very distinctive, cannot be replicated. And that's one of the ways that I approach it. So malolactic is not a recipe tick box for us. It happens to varying degrees depending on the vintage.
Absolutely. And could you please take us through like the aging potential and food pairing? And so just aging potential, flavor-wise, food pairing. Yeah.
Okay, so Chardonnay, I would say it's the winemaker's grape. Winemakers love Chardonnay because it is so versatile and it's so malleable and open to
that was going to be my next question.
Impression. The winemaker can really impart their style on a Chardonnay quite easily. It's malleable like that. It's like putty. Just in terms of ageability, some of the finest white wines in the world are made from Chardonnay.
Yeah, correct.
And this has been a long known and long believed truth.
Yeah.
So the wines can age incredibly well, but for the most part, people enjoy Chardonnays between, I would say, 4 and 10 years of age.
Wow.
And when you talk about the age, you talk about the vintage that is standing on the bottle.
Correct.
Because even though we pick it in 2025, for example, it's only going to go to bottle maybe next year in January. Then it's only going to go to the market 6 months later. So already you're at 1.5 years old.
Already, yeah.
So I say optimal drinking for Chardonnay, if it's a fine wine, top class, between 3 and 8 years, and even 10 years, if that's what you like, a little bit of age in it. When it comes to food pairing, Chardonnay, given that it's made in a classic style, barrel fermented and aged, I say it's a wine that sits between something like Sauvignon Blanc that's stainless steel fermented, clean and crisp, and light and bright, and red wine. It's almost the bridge in between them. So if you think about the textural elements of the wine and the weight of the wine, that's what you must have in mind. It's between fresh, crisp white wine and nice, full-bodied red wine. That's where it lies. And for that reason, it goes very well with quite rich, creamy dishes. Again, you want to lean more to white meats or fish, purely because you want to respect the purity of the grape and the deftness of the grape. You don't want to overpower it with like a steak or something. So I like particularly any seafood dish has got a creamy white wine sauce in it. My particular favorite is sole meunier, which is sole. It's cooked in a pan with butter, cream, and capers. Delicious. Combined with the Chardonnay, they complement each other incredibly well. You can do scallops, pan-seared scallops, with, again, a beurre blanc or something like that. Any white seafood, white fish. Chicken, again, does really well, but you can roast the chicken, or you can have like grilled lemon characteristics, lemon chicken,
definitely.
something along those lines. Duck is a classic one, especially in France. Duck breast, duck l'orange. You're salivating because I am, yeah?
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's a really versatile wine, and it pairs incredibly well with a lot of classic French cuisine.
So now we have covered the white wine. I would love us to I hope I'm not taking much of your time, but don't worry.
I'm going to have a sip if you don't mind.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I think I got a lot of questions, and then I even forget about having a sip of glass of. Talking about the Algerian Sauvignon Blanc, guys. This is the Algerian Sauvignon Blanc I was talking about. So we're just having a sip of this.
Beautiful.
Always for beginners who doesn't know much about wine, you want to drink, do not order the glass like this. Always order the glass like this, because when you order the glass like this, your hands is warmer. So it's going to change the taste and smell of the wine. Always order the glass like this. So, Mr. Stewart, we're going to move to one of the most interesting red grape variety. And that is, we're gonna try to cover both of them at the same time.
Okay.
Because they're both made from one grape variety. So that is Shiraz and Syrah.
Yeah.
Before we get to the making process, could you please tell us what is the difference between Syrah and Shiraz before we even start with the making process?
All right. So, Shiraz and Syrah are exactly the same grape. It's just the name of that grape in two different languages. So Shiraz is English and Syrah is French.
Correct.
However, more and more, the style that the wine is made in is something that you consider when you decide whether to call it Shiraz or Syrah.
Correct.
And the difference is Shiraz is made in a more New World style. The grapes are picked slightly riper. The fruit is a little bit more expressive. And you could almost say that it's slightly sweeter. Just in terms of the flavor profile of the fruit. The fruit is riper. Maybe even if you think about like plum jam and those characteristics, you come across those in wines that are called Shiraz.
Correct.
Cherry wood, all of those characteristics come through in Shiraz. And the spice is very subtle.
Correct.
On Syrah, on the other hand, that's very much in the style that's made in the Rhone Valley in France, where they're not looking to make too broad-shouldered wines. They're actually looking to make medium-bodied wines,
Medium-bodied, yeah.
but with an incredible spice intensity. So a lot of black pepper, white pepper, red crushed pepper kernel. You do get the fruit profile, but whereas the Shiraz would be ripe, almost plum jam, the Shiraz in that Syrah style would be like sour fig, a little bit of sour plum, something like that, not quite ripe, medium bodied. The acidity would be a little bit tighter, a little bit higher. Goes very well with quite rich, fatty dishes for that reason, because that acidity helps to cut the richness of the dish. And then you've got the heady aromatics of black pepper, etc., that are also complementing such dishes. So you can think of like rich stewed meats, braised meats, you know, that's really where Shiraz shines, or Syrah rather. And then Shiraz, you can actually drink it by itself, slightly chilled, I prefer.
Yeah.
Or with something a little bit more flame grilled, like think about a nice steak with béarnaise, something that's had a bit of time on the fire. Those quite powerful aromatics, both in the food and the wine, complement each other again.
Actually, talking about the climate, Syrah and the Shiraz.
Yes.
Can you please take us through that?
So, you can actually make Shiraz and Syrah in the same climate. It's all about how you approach it in the winery.
Correct.
So one of the main things that differentiates them is because you're looking to make a slightly more medium-bodied, spicy, slightly more focused, tighter wine. What you do with Syrah is you pick it a little bit earlier, so lower alcohol, and then you also use, instead of taking the berries off the stems and only fermenting the wine in contact with the berries, you actually throw some of the whole bunches in, so you get some of the stems as well. And the stems gives you a lovely, fresh, almost green tannin.
Yeah.
That you feel both in your mouth, but it also gives a perception of freshness on the palate and the finish of the wine. and even the aromatics.
Mm.
So you can grow them in exactly the same climate. Obviously, some climates are preferred, like the Northern Rhone in France or the Swartland in South Africa, for example. But you can make both those styles. It's how you approach it in the winery that makes the true difference.
And the Shiraz is the most planted grape variety in Australia,
Correct.
also due to the climate as well. So could you please take us through Tokara making process of both Syrah and the Shiraz?
So, like I say, the Shiraz is picked a little bit riper. So we wait maybe an extra week and a half to pick the grapes for the wine that goes to Shiraz. The objective there is to have it a little bit more fruit forward, riper fruit profile. We talk of the concept of sucrosity, which sounds sweet. It is sweet, but it's actually not sweetness in the sense that it's sugar sweetness. It's sweetness in the sense that it has the flavor of ripe fruit without sugar.
Okay.
And that's one of the most interesting components of wine. You get this characteristic. It feels and smells like it should be sweet, but it's actually what we term dry in the palate. Funny terms because it's liquid, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Syrah, on the other hand, is picked a little bit earlier. I put in 40% whole bunch into the bottom of the fermenter because I want that stalky, stemmy characteristic.
Yeah.
A little bit of pepper spice. It's grown on a particular slope on the property that's very steep. And again, it's also got a very high proportion of rock in the soil. And those berries are incredibly small.
Wow.
So the Shiraz, because you want that big, fruity, voluptuous wine, you can grow it in slightly more fertile soil. You get bigger berries, you get a lovely plumpness to the wine. Here with the Syrah, you grow it in incredibly rocky soil, tiny berries, big concentration. But by picking it a little bit earlier, you still get a medium-bodied wine with wonderful spice.
Yeah, I've picked it up with the Tokara Shiraz. Beautiful spicy there, cinnamon flavor, peppery flavor coming through. And how many months did they both spend in barrels?
Okay. So the Tokara Shiraz spends about 12 to 14 months in barrel, again, vintage specific. And then the Syrah is at least 18 months in barrel. And then because the Syrah is so much more concentrated, we put it in 50% brand new French oak.
Okay.
Because it's got the muscle and the broad shoulders to actually
more powerful.
manage that and incorporate that wood into it.
Okay.
Whereas the Syrah, we're focusing on fruit. We don't want to cover the fruit with aromatics from the barrel. We want to let the fruit express itself.
Okay.
And that's why we do less time.
Okay.
And older barrels.
Okay. Okay. Characteristic was, we're talking about like black fruit flavor?
Yeah.
Like more black fruit flavor. And food-wise, I feel like you already covered that already in terms of food-wise. And the aging potential?
Aging potential on something like the Syrah, especially if there's a lot of whole bunch, 10, 15 years easily, provided it's in the right environment. The Shiraz, stylistically, that wine, you should probably enjoy it within 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
And again, slightly chilled.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So now we're going to move to the wine. And when listening to Tokara's story, there's two outstanding wine. Two outstanding wine. We're looking at Cabernet Sauvignon and the Sauvignon Blanc. So we already covered the Sauvignon Blanc. Now we're going to move to Cabernet Sauvignon, which we got almost three different types of Cabernet Sauvignon in front of us.
Yeah.
And when reading the history of Tokara, Tokara is known for award-winning wine estates.
Yeah.
In locally and globally. And that is all thanks to the owner of the farm and the winemaker, which is you, and all the marketing manager. Everybody will put hands together to establish such a successful brand, which is recognized like globally and locally. That's why Tokara is known in terms of winning award. With the
So we wait for the helicopter.
We have a helicopter coming up, guys. We have a helicopter coming up. So maybe it's coming to pick us up. So we're going to start with 2021 Reserve Collection Cabernet Sauvignon.
Brilliant.
That is one of, if not the wine, like a lot of people email Tokara, a lot of people calling. They're like, do you still have this wine in stock? Because they read about it on social media and they're like, we want to buy this wine.
Yeah.
Because this wine win award. Could you please take us through it? Because I don't want to go like question by question. Could you please take us through why this 2021 specific vintage did so great locally and internationally? And how was the process? Was it easy process from the ripening in the vineyard? Because like I said earlier in the beginning of the interview, most people have these things of like wine is not made in the cellar, it's made in the vineyard. So was it how did this just become so nice that is recognized worldwide?
Cabernet Sauvignon, the king of grapes.
Yeah, exactly. That actually good description. The kings of grapes.
King of grapes. So Takara is predominantly planted to Cabernet Sauvignon. This is undoubtedly probably the variety that is the best marriage between a grape and terroir. This is the variety that we can use to express all the attributes of this particular piece of the planet in the glass. And it's a fantastic vehicle to do it. So, like I said, we dominated in our plantings with Cabernet Sauvignon. It allows us immense potential to create and experiment with different styles of wine. So as you know, we have a premium Cabernet Sauvignon. We have a reserve collection Cabernet Sauvignon. We have the Simonsberg, which is part of our gifting range. Very, very bespoke, small volume production, incredibly packaged and presented wine.
Absolutely.
Not to mention extremely delicious.
Absolutely.
Above that, you've got our ambition wine, which is the Telos.
Exactly.
And the Telos is also 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, with the idea that all the way back in the beginning, to have the ambition of making a wine that's going to stand shoulder to shoulder very comfortably with the best wines in the world. That is the wine that we do it with.
Would you prefer to cover all three of them in once?
I think it would be beneficial.
Yeah, so that would be good because especially Telos, guys, I want to tell you this. Myself, I work at Tokara. Telos, am I allowed to say the price?
You can, because it is what it is.
Absolutely. So Telos is a 5,400 rand per bottle. And it's very strict. Tokara makes only 1,000 bottles of this per year. So I'm not gonna talk much about it. I'm gonna let the man who does the work make this wine so nice to take us through 2021 Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, Simonsberg Cabernet Sauvignon, and the Telos, which is the ambitious wine. Yes. Could you please take us through?
All right. So the Reserve Collection Cabernet Sauvignon started its journey with Takara around 2013. That was the first release. And what they were actually doing at the time is building prototype wines, playing with the different vineyards on the property, trying out different barrel cooperages to see which one works best with Cabernet Sauvignon as a standalone. Because up to that point, we'd always used the Cabernet Sauvignon in our Director's Reserve blend. We still do. It's still the foundation of that wine. But the objective was identifying the fact that Cabernet Sauvignon is such a king variety on this property. And then moving towards making a wine where it's just straight Cabernet Sauvignon, which of course is the Telos. But through that prototyping, through that experimentation with different barrel coopers, different fermentation techniques, different block selections, and even within a vineyard, selections, multiple selections and multiple picks, you refine something that is incredible. And that was the beginning of the Reserve Collection Cabernet Sauvignon. And for many years, it was the only standalone Reserve Collection cab that we had. Time goes on, you learn more, you experience the property more and more.
Yeah.
and you get a better idea and feel for unique parcels on the property
Yeah.
that give you truly, truly exceptional characteristics. And that's where projects like the Simonsberg Cabernet comes about.
Wow.
So I'll get a bottle over here. If you look at it, the packaging speaks to the fact that there's a lot of decomposed granite that gives the attribute to this wine. So we've got this beautiful platinum and gray color, paying homage to the granite in the soil. The thing that influences this wine the most is the soil.
Wow.
And the fact that it's on the Simonsberg mountain lends the name to the wine.
Exactly.
This wine, we produce about 1,500 bottles of each year.
Okay.
It's from 3 different parcels on the property
Okay.
that we noticed have a much higher percentage of crushed granite in the profile.
Okay.
And like every other vineyard and the most famous storied vineyards in the world, the combination between clay and gravels and the tension when they fight for each other for water, for reducing the available soil in which the vine can grow, you bonsai the vine. Those attributes give you an improvement in quality.
Wow.
Because we're growing vines. You wouldn't want to grow vegetables in that soil.
Correct.
But we're growing fine wine. So that's how that wine came about. The Telos is a single vineyard on the property. And in actual fact, it's a parcel within that single vineyard that has a higher proportion of colluvial crushed sandstone, small pebbles.
Yeah.
And it, over the years, has shown itself to be head and shoulders above everything else on the property. Unfortunately, we only make 1,000 bottles because that portion is small. And we will only ever make 1,000 bottles. So it becomes a barrel selection from that portion, the 4 best barrels of Cabernet Sauvignon, every vintage goes to that wine.
And the process of making it, Simonsberg, if you can try, or we're going to do one by one, like 2021 Reserve Cab, which won award like with the decanter, and Simonsberg Cabernet Sauvignon, which is doing amazing as well, and Telos.
Yes.
Like how many months did you each spend in the barrels? And I understand the barrel was 20, but I will let you handle that. So, yeah.
We're starting with the Reserve Collection Cabernet Sauvignon. The Reserve Collection Cabernet Sauvignon is a barrel selection of our finest vineyards across the entire property. So it is actually a representation of what Takara can do on a full scale to make a Cabernet Sauvignon where we make thousands of bottles. So we generally make anywhere between 15 and 20,000 bottles of this wine per year. So it's a big barrel selection.
That is big barrel selection.
It's by no means big in terms of what Takara is. It's a small portion, but it's big in terms of a single wine.
Yeah.
It's the older vines on the property, the ones that have more balance, more maturity, slightly more structure. And for that reason, they get chosen for the Reserve Collection. Then you drill down a little bit further. You get the Simonsberg.
Okay.
Simonsberg, 1,500, 1,800 bottles a year from 3 very distinct parcels on the property that have a particularly high percentage of granite in the soil, giving a very unique characteristic, one that I particularly like. And the characteristic that I'm speaking of is cassis and graphite.
Okay.
Which is...
That's really...
If you only use 2 descriptors to describe the way a Cabernet Sauvignon smells, if you use cassis and graphite in there and you find them genuinely in the wine, you know you have Cabernet Sauvignon.
You know you are dealing with the proper Cabernet Sauvignon.
The king is in the house.
Yeah.
All right. And then we have the Telos, which is exactly as I said, it's a single variety. I mean, single vineyard, single variety wine, best 4 barrels of cab from that block on the property. The other thing that one has to remember is when you have a property like Takara, which has got so many undulating hills and diverse areas and different age vineyards, you have the potential to produce all these different types of Cabernet Sauvignon. But never forget that we're playing to our strength. And Cabernet Sauvignon is our strength. It's the same reason that the Director's Reserve Red, which is our long-standing flagship blend, is dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon. Because we know where Takara's strength is, and that's in its variety.
Yeah. definitely. So the reserve cap have spent how many months in the barrel and the Simmons back and Tilos?
All of them spent 22 months in barrel. The percentage of new wood varied though.
Okay.
So the Reserve Collection Cabernet Sauvignon is made in a slightly bolder style. Call it more New World, almost Napa style. That means that the fruit is riper. We're looking for barrels with a slightly higher toasting level, slightly charier, giving you those beautiful grilled characteristics that come through, complementing the graphite, the ripe fruit profile. Quite broad-shouldered wine with a beautiful sucrosity as well. That's Reserve Collection Cab, 22 months in barrel, about 60% new.
New oak.
The balance
Okay.
being second and a tiny component of third full.
Okay. Okay.
The Simonsberg and the Tilos, small quantities, 100% new French oak. Some of the best French oak barrels available on planet Earth.
Wow.
Especially in the case of the Tilos. There we spare no expense in giving the wine absolutely every opportunity to be one of the best wines in the world. And that means that the barrels that we use for that wine often cost 3 to 4 times as much as the barrels we use for our other wines.
Wow.
Just for one barrel.
Wow.
And
So that
barrels
means
aren't
the
cheap to
best
begin
barrel.
with.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it really is a case of pushing the envelope in terms of what wine can do in South Africa and in the context of Cabernet Sauvignon, and taking that to the world unashamedly and competing with them at a game they've been playing for a lot longer than us.
And adding potential in all of them, food-wise as well, for all of them, what would you suggest?
So typically the food companionship for these wines would be very similar.
That's what I thought as well. Yeah.
The only real difference being the Simonsberg and the Reserve Collection perhaps lend themselves more to flame-grilled meats, red meat particularly, something, nice ribeye steak, flame-grilled. You can have fries on the side if you want. You can do some braised meat dishes, something that's cooked low and slow for longer. Bring some vegetables into the mix in a stew. It'll work with that as well. But for the most part, I think the flame-grilled red meats are really where they stand proudly. The Tilos, you wouldn't really drink that wine in that environment. Often people drink the Tilos, they share it with 4 or 5 other people, one bottle, so that you each get just a glass
The
to
class
appreciate absolute class in a glass.
Yeah.
And that's what the Tilos is about. So I don't suspect that people generally drink that
With-
wine with food.
I agree.
But if you had to do it with food, you want something classic French-style dishes, even like a beef bourguignon, or something like that. Something with a nice jus, a reduction, a sauce. Very, very classic French-style cooking generally goes particularly well with it. I particularly like a roast lamb shoulder. So if you're going to go with lamb, which is a very South African thing, not many people eat as much lamb in South Africa. Nice roast lamb shoulder, a bit of garlic pushed into the flesh before it goes in the oven, bit of rosemary, complements some of the notes on the nose of that wine. And then every sip that you take of the wine refreshes the palate, cuts the richness of the dish out of your mouth, so that the next bite is even, again, a brand new experience of flavor. And then very, very complementary, those two dishes.
And the adding potential for Tilos, Simonsberg, and the Reserve Cap,
As long as you can resist them.
especially Tilos. Especially Tilos.
So Tilos, it's
Yeah.
made in a style that will age incredibly well.
Yeah.
So like I said, the first vintage of Tilos was 2015. We know from the other wines that are not quite even as powerful as Tilos, that will age very well for at least 15 to 20 years. But I suspect, personally, that we will find in 30, 40, and 50 years' time that those wines still have power and presence.
Correct.
And that's what we aim to achieve with that style
With
of wine.
Tilos, I agree. I always tell client like with Tilos, you're looking at like a 40 to 50 years aging potential.
Yeah.
Like, oh really? I'm like, definitely.
But you have to resist it for
Yeah, you have to resist.
Yeah.
You have to check your age potential as well. So
buy it for your
yeah,
children.
yeah. So I just want to recap, guys, on the barrel, the one Mr. Stewart was talking about, first, second, third. What does that mean? Barrels are like a tea bag. Just to give an example, if you use tea bag for the first time, they're gonna have more flavor. But
Yeah.
if you use it second time, it's gonna have less flavor. So it's the same story with barrels. When we say first fill barrel, that means you're dealing with wine which got more flavor, the intensity and the complexity of the wine is gonna be higher. If you say second and third fill barrel, that means the intensity and the complexity of the wine is lower. So just to tell those who our listeners, so that you
cover
know
that.
what is a first, second, third fill barrel means. So Mr. Stewart, now we're gonna move to direct reserve, right?
Yeah.
But this is almost like one of the king wine at Tokara.
Yeah.
It's a blend. I know it.
Mm-hmm.
But can you please take us through it?
Okay. So Director's Reserve Red is what we would describe as our flagship wine at Takara. So when I told you in the beginning of this interview about the wine that was a blend that we made initially
Correct.
and
I
released
remember.
for the first time, Takara Red, it was actually
Direct.
the forefather to the Director's Reserve Red.
Wow.
All right? This entire property, Takara, was planted with that wine in mind. So every variety that was planted, every red variety, outside of Shiraz, of course, was planted in order to have a great selection of different vineyards, a rich tapestry, if you will, that we could choose from, only the best to make our flagship wine. So having said that, if you look at the Director's Reserve Red, it is a wine that gives you an insight into the potential of any vintage at Takara. So if we are tasting, say, for example, the 2021, if you just taste one wine, and it's the Director's Reserve Red, you will have an insight into the quality and potential of that vintage. Because winemaking is not, again, it's not painting by numbers, it's not working to a recipe. You have to interpret the vintage. Every vintage is different. That's what makes winemaking interesting. That's what makes wine collecting and drinking interesting. Because there will always be what they call a golden thread from a property that tells you, okay, this is, for example, the Director's Red from Takara. But this vintage and the one that follows it and the one that follows it will have their own personalities.
Correct.
And it all depends on how the season behaved, what Mother Nature did, whether she was angry or whether she was happy, you know? And that all dictates the outcome for the wines.
Mr. Stewart, I feel like we have covered pretty much all of them. And before I conclude the interview, I would love to ask your best advice to any young person out there who never had a dream of becoming a winemaker. So what are the positive and the negative of being a winemaker? What are the challenges you faced coming up?
So there are a few things that I believe make a good winemaker. One is a good sense and an interest in taste, flavors. Like, for some reason, my entire life, I've smelled things. Every single thing. I love picking leaves and smelling them. And, you know, fresh laundry, smell it. This couch, I can smell the leather.
Yeah.
I have a very, very developed sense of smell. But everybody has a very good sense of smell. It's just how much attention you pay to it.
Correct.
So if that's something that is a natural inclination of yours, perhaps you are very suited to being a winemaker.
Absolutely.
Outside of that, you have to understand that winemaking is not all about suits and ties and enjoying wine with friends and having the meal that looks like the Last Supper, you know.
You have to be
It's
in the
not always
cellar.
that. It's a lot of hard work. When it comes to processing grapes in the harvest season, it's lots of long hours. It's dirty work. I mean, the biggest thing in winemaking is actually cleaning. the winemaking's the easy part. It's keeping everything clean that's more difficult. And that's actually what separates the better ones from the worst ones. And then grit, because you know when it really gets tough, and you're in the 3rd month of harvest, you need to have the type of personality that doesn't just sit down and give up. You need to know that you're going for a goal and you're not there yet.
That is true.
Of course, studies are important. You need to study to be a winemaker. You can't just become a winemaker. So I'd encourage anybody that's interested in it to align their subjects at school, if they're that young, so that it will allow them access to study the right degree, which is oenology and viticulture. It's something I had to do from a young age, but you know, there's a famous expression. It says, what is it? A dream is a goal without a plan.
Correct. Correct. That sounded like myself. When I moved to South Africa, I had only dream.
Yeah.
Never plan, never starting capital. And yeah, with things goes by, the plan, the dream become a plan become a reality.
Exactly.
So you listen to the man himself. It's never easy as you think. I have worked in a cellar myself, not as a winemaker, but I have worked in the cellar myself. I have worked in the vineyard as well. I can assure you, it's not easy. In both either cellar or in the vineyard.
But it's rewarding.
But you will get rewarded at the end. And I love one thing Mr. Stewart just say, attitude is a key. You always have to stay humble. And I can testify, Mr. Stewart, very humble. This is making wine months. You could have been busy making wine, but you offered his time. And I want to say thank you so much, Mr. Stewart. And thank you so much for making your time for us. And I hope everybody who's listening out today, if you have any question, if you're studying agriculture, if you're studying wine, you have any question, just go to our channel. We will be uploading this video next week. Just go in the bottom, put your comment there. Send us the question that you would love us to ask Mr. Stewart one day. And of course, he's not going to be always there for the interview, but I can always just relay the message. Okay, what was your question concerning maybe ripening or pruning as well? Thank you so much, guys. And thank you so much, Mr. Stewart, for the opportunity.
Yeah.
We will see you in our next episode. So this was the first Chim's wine tasting event talk show, strictly wine only. What we're trying to do at Chim's wine tasting event, in South Africa, we make a very great wine. That nobody can tell me otherwise. That for sure I know. But I feel like in South Africa, we're not marketing this wine the way we're supposed to, globally. I feel like locally we're doing good enough, but globally we're not. So we, at Chim's wine tasting event and some other young generation out there, some winemakers like Mr. Stewart himself, we're championing up now to let the rest of the world know that, listen, South Africa is here and is here to stay in the wine industry, and we're going to raise our hands up and we're going to be recognized. Just like Sauvignon Blanc is winning now the award globally, just like the Cabernet Sauvignon is winning, and other many more wine. So guys, subscribe to the channel so that you can get everything that we're going to be doing, and we will see you in our next episode, and this one will be uploading it soon. Thank you so much, Mr. Stewart.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, sir. Highly appreciate it.
Anytime.
Absolutely.